Phenomenological Research by Quincy Kelly and Callum Lynch. David Woodruff Smith suggests that phenomenology is the study of our experience.
This seemingly straightforward idea is riddled with complexity, and the purpose of our presentation is to bring meaning to your understanding of the word phenomenology. As defined in our course package, phenomenological research method design is a qualitative research method in which the researcher conducts an in-depth and extensive study of participants' experiences of an event or situation from their participants' perspective. This research specifically attends to the description and meaningful interpretation of one's lived experience. Phenomenology acknowledges and celebrates what Cohen describes as the phenomena of experience as shared by the experiencer. Similarly, Spiegelberg, a past authority of the phenomenological movement, states that all phenomenology takes its start from the phenomena. A phenomenon is essentially what appears to someone that is to a subject. The positivist approach assumes that the outside world has a definite, correct meaning that we then imperfectly process. In contrast, the phenomenological view of knowledge suggests that our interpretation of the world around us is part of what the world around us actually means.
As a quick example, the concept of time is something we all experience differently in the world. It's not something we can see or hear or touch, smell, or physically feel. But you might be thinking, we can measure it in seconds and minutes and hours. Nevertheless, our concept of time is relative to our experience. It could fly by when you're having fun or drag out when you're doing some schoolwork. Therefore, our individual experience of time may be more informative in understanding it than the static measurements themselves.
As for the beginnings of phenomenology, some would argue that the origins of the practice of phenomenology date back centuries to when Buddhists began meditating on human existence. For the purposes of our shared knowledge, the origins of phenomenology as an approach to research through the lens of science and philosophy date back to 1906 and mathematician Edmund Husserl. According to Cohen, Edmund Husserl is regarded by many as the founder of phenomenology. A mathematician at heart, Husserl created a first-person approach to research that is as interpretable as each participant's, multiplied to the power of each individual interpreter. The challenge of the methodology was for researchers to, quote, free ourselves from our usual ways of perceiving the world, end quote. Phenomenology rose out of a reaction to the objectification of positivist science. Husserl counters by suggesting research must go back to the things themselves. Things are not simply things, but instead become things in the act of perceiving and naming them.
Together with ethnomethodology and symbolic interactionism, phenomenology is considered one of three traditions of qualitative research methods that emerged in the post-positivist world of philosophy. It is important to note that two distinct approaches of phenomenological research exist, and that is interpretive and descriptive. Descriptive phenomenology, as it implies, focuses simply on describing the lived experience of a participant, instead of trying to interpret the meaning. This often involves some kind of reflexive journal in which a researcher brackets off their own experiences and assumptions. The interpretive phenomenological approach focuses on describing the lived experience while also ascribing meaning to the data collected. This takes on more of a hermeneutic approach by interpreting the experiences through our own lens of understanding. As shown, the prolific practice of phenomenology has evolved throughout the decades and taken on other human inquiry models.
As suggested throughout this presentation, the purpose of phenomenological research is intended to share and know the lived experience of others. and the knowledge created is fragile, unique, and can provide incredibly intimate information that enhances practice and deepens empathy of professionals in our related fields. This knowledge of the world is dependent on our interactions and experiences within it. This is our lived experience. A researcher enacting this kind of qualitative method must attempt to describe, interpret, and understand a phenomenon, situation, or experience through the perspectives of their participants, both as individuals and within a group. Epistemologically, phenomenological research is based on a paradigm of personal knowledge and subjectivity and emphasizes the importance of personal perspective and interpretation.
Three essential processes of research using phenomenological approach include description, reduction, and naming. The description is an attempt to focus on the things themselves and set aside preconceptions or tendencies to analyze. Reduction is where bracketing is used, whereby a researcher attempts to isolate their own beliefs regarding the phenomenon and reduce the data to the experiences of the participants. Finally, naming is the stage in which the essential themes and thematic analysis are brought to the surface of the data.
The relationship between researcher and participant can be characterized as very intimate, as participants must share very personal experiences to engage in the research process. In addition, when utilizing the interpretive phenomenological approach, the experience of the researcher themselves becomes an integral part of the research process. In some cases, the researcher is required to engage in bracketing. This is a term that describes the process of the researcher recording their own views, experiences, and knowledge related to the phenomena that they are researching. The process is designed to ensure that the researcher has explored and acknowledged any biases that they may have in relation to the phenomenon. Both descriptive and interpretive phenomenological approaches require a small sample of individuals with the shared experiences of the phenomena who are willing to share their stories. These studies rely on very small sample sizes, often 10 or fewer participants. Non-probability sampling is the technique used in collecting participants, and this might include purposeful sampling, quota sampling, or convenience sampling. In each case, participants are selected based on their experience with the phenomenon of interest and their ability or willingness to relay that experience through written, verbal, or visual expression.
A variety of interview types are common data collection instruments in phenomenology. This can include in-depth, unstructured, conventional, and active interviews. Art, journals, photographs, and diaries are just a few examples of other data collection instruments implemented in the phenomenological research. Data collected from each participant is carefully reviewed and analyzed, and finally interpreted thematically. As common themes emerge from the data, the researcher may determine that further research is required. The researcher can ultimately describe the themes to create a conceptual framework for the phenomenon. Various methods of determining value include transferability, resonance, and credibility of themes.
The purpose of the article, An Empirical Phenomenological Study, Being Joyful, is to better understand the nature of being joyful through interpretive phenomenological research. Through his work, Robbins argues that the phenomenological method is the most well-suited for extrapolating meaning from the ambiguousness of feelings.
Perhaps more relevant to our field of study, an article by Bolat, Phenomenological Investigation with Prospective Teachers of Special Education, If It Was Me, focuses on the pedagogical opinions of special education teachers in training. Data was collected by semi-structured interviews, whereby participants responded both verbally and through self-made drawings. The information gathered from the participants was systematized into themes, which later provided insightful ideas in preparing future special education teachers. To conclude our presentation, we consider the idea of where our knowledge comes from. And as Herschel cautions, we would be in a nasty position indeed if empirical science were the only kind of science possible. Thank you for watching.